There's an elderly man lying in a bed in a dark, quiet room. Around him are family, children, grandchildren, trying hard not to let him see their tears. He wouldn't be able to see them anyway through his own. His tears are not because he's dying, he had lived a long, busy life, but because of a painful realization that gripped him in these last moments. He had achieved so much, was the top of his class, expert in his field, wealthy and well known, but in all of his pursuit of success, he had failed to pursue what really mattered. The family now gathered around him. In the midst of his life, his understanding and pursuit of success seemed right and valuable, but on this end, he realized what that pursuit cost him and how little he had actually gained. If he could do it all again, he would embrace being unsuccessful for the sake of what really matters. Now, we've all heard that classic anecdote, and we might accept this cautionary tale broadly, but too often don't apply it throughout our lives. And it's understandable. Functionally, it seems like success matters. If you aren't successful, how can you put food on the table? If you don't have a good reputation, how will you be respected? We equate success with thriving so completely that being unsuccessful is avoided at all costs, which is why this talk is counterintuitive. Now, I'm not going to teach you how to land the next big guest or increase your ranking or monetize your episodes. Those things can be valuable. I'm going to equip you to be unsuccessful. That sounds crazy, right? After all, it feels more logical to invest time in learning how to do things well and effectively. The truth is, that's not wrong. And we aren't so much trying to be unsuccessful as much as we are trying to define what true success is. Make sure you hear this. Sometimes we pursue the perception of success rather than actual success. The numbers, the sponsorships, the high-profile guests, the acclaim, these can all be good things, but are they actual success for your podcast? And even in the good stuff, there's a danger that we can lose ourselves in the pursuit of success when, deep down, most of us didn't start for success. We started to make a difference, to encourage others, to invest in our gifts and passions. But then we heard what success was supposed to be, and our alignment quietly shifted. If we haven't done a heart motive check, practiced some humble introspection, we may become successful and miss our target entirely. If you can hone your understanding of true success in your podcast, even if it means appearing unsuccessful to others, you will find a deeper value and more robust success than best practices alone could reach. Not only will your efforts be life-giving for you, but for your guests and audience as well. Consider right now a pause for grounding, reorientation, or realignment. In a few moments, we will hit some questions that can help with that realignment, but let's start with acknowledging that we don't acknowledge the need. I'm sure I'm not alone in failing to take my car in for a regular tire alignment, mostly because it seems to be driving fine. The reality is, a car can easily get out of alignment, and though it may seem to be driving fine, give it time and it'll run off the road. Your podcast can seem to be driving fine, but if it's not in alignment with your core values and goals, you may one day find yourself burnt out, frustrated, or creating content that strayed far from your initial hopes. So just as a car needs its tire alignment regularly checked, practicing humble introspection can ensure your podcast is in alignment. Now, humble introspection is the act of processing decisions with thoughts like, why am I doing this? What am I ultimately after? And does what I'm doing align with that? Now, the idea is not to figure out what's right or wrong. Life is often not that clear cut, but to discern what's driving us and where we are heading. So let's process some questions together. Number 1, are you ready to really define success for you? I want you to think about what true success is for you. Now, I'm not talking about the traditional metrics, but what really matters to you. The elderly man on his deathbed knew all the normal metrics of success, wealth, reputation, power, and latching onto those kept him from realizing what really mattered. Here's the thing. It's unlikely family only started mattering on his deathbed. In reality, family likely always mattered, just not as much as those other things. It's an issue of prioritization. We can authentically care about a lot of things, but if we don't acknowledge where they fall on our priority list, we won't realize how often they don't make the cut. The man never didn't care for his kids, but his life was filled with moments where his care for being successful led to neglect. Of the millions of podcasts, there are plenty out there that exist simply to produce money, in which case sponsors, advertisers, monetization, high profile guests, and increasing listeners are all relevant. My guess, though, is the fact that you are here means that your podcast exists for something deeper. Is it to create a space that doesn't yet exist? To highlight something important that's gone unseen? Is it about your own personal journey or healing or exploration? Solidifying the core of why your podcast exists can help you know what is actually needed for it to survive and thrive. It can keep you from neglecting important things for the sake of progress. So as you try to discern true success for your podcast, process this. At the end of it all, what would really matter? When your podcast is on its deathbed, what would allow you to close it down with peace and joy? What can you do today to orient in that direction? An example of this is one you may have said. If even one person is impacted, it's worth it. Yeah, that's great. It's a mindset that drives me as well, but how bought in are we? This leads to our next question. Number 2, are you willing to do unsuccessful things? I once had a season of my podcast focus on the tricky concept of healing, exploring miraculous recoveries to unanswered prayers and how to find God in the midst. Now, at one point, I was connected with a guest whose profile highlighted her long-term disability and how that impacts her everyday life. I thought exploring long-term disability could make for a great conversation. The successful thing would be to craft out key questions to explore her disability, highlight important points, and really sell the disability theme. But one of my core values is affirming that every guest I encounter is made in the image of God and deserving of love-based engagement from that identity, not one I assume. Put another way, I needed to engage her as someone who had a story to tell rather than a broad sweep of disabled person. Only seeing her with that broad identity of disabled person would lock my focus on that one component of who she is. But what if she longs to share something else? What if she's tired of being asked the same questions, seen in the same way? Going into the conversation, I knew I needed to let her guide where the conversation would go, but I also knew this would be an unsuccessful move in terms of spotlighting my theme. In fact, nearly 10 minutes into talking, the topic of disability hadn't come up at all, and what she shared went in a very different direction. However, I was committed to letting her decide when, or if, the topic of disability would surface. When it finally did, it affirmed my decision to do something unsuccessful for the sake of honoring my guest. Not only did our engagement of that topic feel more organic and honest, she shared later that she appreciated that I didn't make a broad sweep of who she was and what she had to offer. In fact, the theme changed drastically, and the episode became a powerful one on empathy, which wasn't even on my radar. My ideas would have limited the conversation and potentially dishonored her. The unsuccessful move of releasing control led to a beautiful and valuable interaction that left her feeling cared for. As you podcast, you may have a keen sense of the things that you're supposed to do and not supposed to do. Sometimes those can be spot on, but the reality is it's not carved in stone. Are you willing to do unsuccessful things? Until you honestly ask that question, your default will be to do what you're supposed to do and avoid what you aren't. When you acknowledge the willingness, you can make a counterintuitive or even foolish move that may end up providing incredible value. Number 3, are you willing to look unsuccessful to others? There's this classic movie trope that we've seen a dozen times, and it goes a little something like this. The scene opens on a group of podcasters who have been working hard to grow in their craft. They've studied and implemented best practices, regularly attended podcasting events, and are becoming experts in their field. They're waiting for the arrival of a pro podcaster, and when she enters, they are not disappointed. Her presence exudes success, and when she begins to speak, they can't help but to think, now that's a podcasting voice. They are ready for her to tell them how to be successful. She looks around at the eager group and holds up a binder full of podcasting best practices. I hear you all are all the best of the best in podcasting right now. I imagine you've been studying and implementing these best practices. They nod confidently. Without flinching, she tosses the binder into a conveniently placed trash can beside her. Forget everything you know. I mean, you've seen it, right? There's always a group who worked hard to know exactly what to do, only to find that the rules were more like guidelines, and the path to true success may be unconventional or even foolish. Now, as I said before, we are prone to pursue the perception of success rather than actual success. We don't want to do the wrong thing or look like fools or failures to others. So our next steps can become based on the perception of others rather than our own values. The podcast matching service Podmatch threw the rules in the trash recently. As a young business, they know what success is supposed to look like: high numbers. In fact, they were making it happen. Numbers were high and they appeared successful. But the team has a core value: quality over quantity. And though the appearance of success was nice, they realized prioritizing numbers would impact the quality for the committed Podmatchers. So they did something crazy. They purged 46% of their entire user base. In a world where more is better, cutting your users in half would make you seem unsuccessful. And that could very well be the case for anyone only looking at the numbers. But the Podmatch team values the user experience, and they knew many users were frustrated by frequent connections with inactive or uncommitted users. They purged those accounts and immediately received strong positive response from those who remained. What seemed unsuccessful has actually brought success. It's important that you honestly ask yourself if you're willing to look unsuccessful to others. Too often, our default is to shape how we are perceived by others and avoid anything that could make us look bad. In fact, a sub-question here is, who am I doing this for? Are you doing it for the hypothetical critics? Realistically, you're likely doing it for that guest who has already messaged you to say they appreciate the recent episode and who will never ask, but what is your ranking? Practically, all of this could mean maybe you take a break from looking at your stats. It could mean evaluating spaces where you may fall into a comparison mindset. Whatever you need to do to free yourself from a performative stance can lead to a healthier podcast sooner than you think. And number 4, are you willing to celebrate your unsuccessfulness? Now, as we close, this last question invites us into practical ways we can recognize true success rather than focus on things that look unsuccessful. It's amazing that as adults, we carry the same struggles we assumed we fixed as kids. And as podcasters, we can be prone to compare ourselves to more successful podcasts, lament that our numbers aren't as high as we'd hoped, or question if we should even be podcasting when an episode gets no feedback. My kids wrestle with the same mindsets. It's very common for them to compare themselves to classmates and feel lesser, to lament when they aren't as good at something as they'd hoped, and question things when they're doing something and no one seems to be paying attention. As their father, though, I know the truth. Their value is not based on their rank with their classmates. It's okay if they aren't good at something because they're still learning and still exploring. And it shouldn't be fully on them to feel valued. We'll come back to that one. Knowing all this, my wife and I strive to encourage our kids to affirm the value in themselves. Sure, maybe you aren't as fast as your friend, but you are really gifted in this other way. Sure, it's hard for you to color within the lines, but just imagine what it will look like if you keep practicing. As podcasters, we need to own that we are prone to celebrate the standard metrics of success, numbers and ranking, and ask if we're willing to celebrate our unsuccessfulness, the things that don't show up on the charts, but are arguably more important. Practically, keeping a running document or journal of these things could bring an unexpected, powerful, and enduring source of energy to your podcasting. What could it look like to keep a record of the encouragements along the way? To copy and paste that kind message from a listener? To make a note of conversations that made you feel good at what you do? To note moments when you recognize your podcast is filling a gap for someone? Coming back to these in hard moments can be restorative. You could also track healthy milestones to celebrate. There are millions of podcasts, but most don't make it out of single digits episodes. Did you make it to 10? That's worth celebrating. You've managed to do what many couldn't. Did you cross 100? Think of the perseverance that represents. You can also find encouragement by celebrating anniversaries. Publicly share whenever you hit a new year mark of your podcast. Reminisce on the anniversary of a themed season or reflect on a past episode that was meaningful. This simple act does something powerful in your brain as it shifts your thoughts from the perceptions of success to the things that actually matter. Plus, your authentic excitement might just encourage someone to become a new listener. I mentioned that I would come back to that piece, that my kids should not be solely responsible for knowing their value. Now, while it is true that it's important for us to know how to do the important internal work of knowing who we are and learning to be content no matter what others say, we humans are actually designed for community. One of the best things that we can do with all of this is come alongside each other, celebrating the unsuccessfulness together. Over the past year, as I've engaged more with fellow podcasters, this has been a profound source of encouragement. Podcasting can be difficult, but I can't tell you how many times words from someone like you or hearing your own processing has given me a needed boost. We have an opportunity as we learn to thrive in our own podcasting to encourage, inspire, and support others in theirs. The cautionary tale at the start doesn't have to be your story. The fact that you are here means that you are willing to challenge your understanding of how podcasts work. And I want to say this directly to you. What you are doing matters. What doesn't matter is how the charts or hypothetical voices define success, because they don't know your heart and what drives you. The value of an impacted life carries far more weight than a spot on a chart or a new sponsor. Learning what really matters can set you up to thrive in ways you weren't sure you ever could. It's okay to be unsuccessful, because you may actually be more successful than you know.